We are back. We are back. We are back. How is everybody doing? This is part two of my discussion of energy policy actions, interventions that I would support or that I would do if I were in power in South Africa. The first video, I did say that this is a three-part series, so to speak. The first video, I focused on the power generation side of energy, and I spoke about the construction of two large nuclear power stations to the size of 5,000 installed megawatt capacity and probably an operational capacity of anything between 3.5 to 4,000 megawatts. And that, by any definition, is a large power station, which would probably be very critical to any country of a population size of, say, 100 million people, which is more than what South Africa currently has. And obviously, if you're looking at all of these and you think that there's excess power being generated, don't let that bother you, because South Africa produces excess power already. South Africa produces electricity for Botswana, for Namibia, for Zimbabwe, Mozambique, for Swaziland, and Lesotho. Some of these countries we produce up to 50% of their power needs, some of them less, but on average around 25% of their power needs. So you should not worry yourself about excess power being generated, because the most important thing for us would be the economic output that comes with all those jobs being generated, and the excess power that is being produced will be sold to our neighbors who by and large do not have the capacity to produce power at the level that South Africa is able to. Now I move my direction now into looking at the issue of the petroleum side of things, oil and gas and petroleum products, which are needed for a thriving economy. If we're going to have a thriving economy, because you use cars, automobiles, trucks, all of those things, jet fuel. And there are very few countries in Africa who have the refining capacity that South Africa has. But even with that said, our refining capacity is not even close to being enough. We are still importing a lot of refined products, even though we export a lot of them as well, but we're still importing quite a bit. So I'm going to focus on that in this video, but particularly focusing in terms of the jobs that will be created if we go on a very ambitious, you can even say audacious build campaign on the side of the petroleum side of things. Yeah, but stay with me. Let's look into it. So, as in all things, folks, I always try to situate my discussion of these things on a factual, contextual basis, in a situation where people can actually understand the context and the scope of the numbers that I'm talking about. That's very actually important, because you need to get a sort of an idea of what I'm talking about in terms of size relative to what, and the impact as well. So we're going to start with saying, maybe looking at the largest oil refinery in Africa is the Dangote refinery, which is recently started producing. It started producing last year, 2024. It is not fully complete yet in terms of to its full capacity, the design specs for its capacity, but it is already operational. So they are slowly commissioning and building up the units as they go along. So in this particular video, I'm going to use oil refinery and gas refinery interchangeably because in terms of, because here we use barrels per day as a measure of capacity in terms of how much is being produced or how much is being processed. Yeah, so don't get caught up in terms of whether it's an oil refinery or a gas refinery, because for this particular video, it won't necessarily be very important. Yeah, so with that being said, I'll have to say that, so the largest gas oil refinery in Africa is this Dangote refinery, which when it is fully completed, it will produce 650,000 barrels of crude oil per day. And it is the largest single train refinery in the world and Africa's largest oil refinery. And this refinery by Aliko Dangote, the richest man in Africa, is expected to create more than 135,000 permanent jobs in the region upon its full operation. That includes the direct jobs, indirect jobs, contractor jobs, and all of those other support jobs. That is actually quite incredible, folks. It's the impact of this refinery on West Africa cannot be measured in words. And so I would have to say then, in order to situate this in the South African context, we'll have to look in terms of what is the largest complex right now in South Africa that produces petroleum products. That would be the Sasol complex in Secunda, which produces petrol, diesel, paraffin, jet fuel, chemicals, fertilizers. This complex has a production capacity of 160,000 barrels per day. So when you put it side by side with the Dangote refinery, it is plus or minus 4 times smaller than the Dangote refinery. Plus or minus. We can even say anything between 3 times to 4 times smaller. It is small compared to the Dangote refinery, but it is not small. If you know this complex, I mean, if you've been to Secunda, or you've driven past the Secunda and see how large this complex is, it's not small. But I'm just trying to situate it in the context in terms of size compared to the Dangote refinery that was built in Nigeria last year. And the Sasol Secunda complex currently employs more than 17,000 people. That's actually also quite incredible in the context of South Africa. 17,000 people, that's direct jobs and indirect jobs. And so with those numbers in mind, the Dangote refinery and the Sasol complex, we have other refineries obviously in South Africa. We have the Mossel Bay gas refinery right now, which is not really operating in full capacity. We have the Chevron refinery in Cape Town, which was sold. Chevron, I think it was sold to the Chinese in Cape Town, which produces around 100,000 barrels per day. Also, the one in Mossel Bay, 100,000 barrels per day. You have the Durban Engine Supref refinery, which is sort of closed now. Also, it was producing quite a bit. And then you have Sasolburg as well. So, and because we have like 2 or 3 of our refineries have actually been closed down or are semi-closed, South Africa has been importing quite a bit of our refined or finished petroleum products, which, by the way, that is us exporting jobs to other nations. And so, and I have a solution in mind here, and that is from building an oil or gas refinery, which can be built either in the northwest towards the border of Northwest and Botswana, or in Limpopo, with my preference being the northwest, somewhere between Gaborone and that side of Northwest towards Gaborone, the capital of Botswana. And then the question then for a lot of people would be, how are you going to get all of this oil or gas or both from Angola? Is there a precedence for getting product that far away to use it in a particular different market? And yes, there is. Take, for instance, the Nord Stream 1 pipeline, which is a pipe that produces gas, that delivers gas, natural gas, liquefied natural gas from Russia all the way to Germany. The distance that this pipeline covers is 1,225 kilometers. Just to situate it for you, this is like a pipeline that goes from Durban all the way to, okay, maybe Durban is too close, all the way to Cape Town, and then divert it again to Mossel Bay. So let's just say all the way from Durban to Cape Town, and then from Cape Town to Mossel Bay. That would be the equivalent distance. But not only that, the Russians also then, after the success of their Nord Stream 2 pipeline, then they built another pipeline, which is Nord Stream 2 pipeline, because they want to deliver more gas to Europe. And this pipeline is also 1,200 kilometers in distance, going all the way from Moscow, from Russia to Germany. And so this, and the reason why I'm using both of these pipes, because if you're looking at the cost that it will take to build two pipelines for these such long distances, that would be something close to 3,000 kilometers of pipeline that Russia has actually invested in and committed to. But that pipeline is also nothing compared to the KeyStone pipeline, which delivers gas from Canada to the United States, and the full length of this pipeline is 3,500 kilometers, all the way from Canada to these United States of America, 3,500 kilometers. That is a very long distance, folks. That is like, it is a pipeline from Musina, Limpopo, all the way to Cape Town and back to Musina. That is how far it is. And so with that said, if South Africa and Angola were to come into an agreement about some of the oil reserves or the gas reserves that Angola is currently not exploiting for one reason or the other, because Angola has millions and millions of cubic meters of oil and gas that is just untouched, unexploited. Nothing is happening with it. And if we were to come into an agreement, and that's not a difficult thing to do actually, because all of these countries that are sitting on oil or gas, they want to make money from it. And all the time, they only exploit as much as they are able to based on the capacity that they have at a given time and the investment that they are able to draw. Because to exploit gas or oil requires a lot of money for the exploration and all that, and building wells, which requires petroleum engineers and chemical engineers and mechanical engineers to build these wells and all of that. And then put in the pipes to actually extract it and send it to the market where it needs to go. So that won't be a problem. So the distance though between to the Angola gas fields where this gas is and the oil, if either we get either or both, is around 3,800 kilometers to get to South Africa Northwest or Limpopo, which is a similar distance to the very successful KeyStone pipeline. And this pipeline would go through three countries. That would go from Angola, and then Namibia, and Botswana, and then South Africa, which will be the fourth country. And that's not so abnormal or unusual, because if you compare it to, for instance, to the Nord Stream pipeline, it goes from Russia through Estonia, Latvia, Sweden, Lithuania, Denmark, 6 countries, and before it gets to country number 7, which is Germany, where it is going. So that is actually not something that is abnormal or has no precedence or has not been done in the past. And then also comparing it also to the Nord Stream, the other pipeline in the North American, continental America, is that it goes from Canada to the US, and that's 2 countries, and it goes over 3 different times zones and 3,500 kilometers in total. And so before we get to in terms of how large this refinery will be, which it will definitely have to be large to justify all of this almost 4,000 kilometer of pipeline. But let's go to that first. Is it practical? Yes, it's practical, because I was discussing actually in the last month or so with my former chemical engineering professor at the University of Cape Town about the issues around the lack of natural gas in South Africa. And we were talking about now the cost that comes to the fact that South Africa now is going to have to import natural gas from abroad, which will come mostly through shipments. And natural gas that comes through shipment is very expensive compared to natural gas that comes through pipelines, which is why, for instance, the United States of America has struggled and failed completely to prevent Europe from buying Russian gas, which goes to Europe via a pipeline, as opposed to the more expensive American gas, which goes to the European market via shipments, because the cost of shipping gas with shipments could be up to 10 times more expensive. Maybe let's just say 5 to 10 times more expensive per unit, per cubic meter, or per barrel, in terms of shipping it by shipments as opposed to sending it to the desired market by pipeline, which is why Europe, which has been in an active war against Russia now for the past 10 years or past 11 years, since 2014, has continue to buy gas and oil from Russia, because it is so cheap. Because when you are buying gas or oil that comes through a pipeline, it is way cheaper. It is economically viable. So that's an economic argument, that to say it will be cheaper for us to just have an agreement with Angola and get oil and gas from them, compared to getting the gas that we're getting through shipments that arrive at the Cape Town harbour or the Durban harbour or the Richards Bay harbour. It's the same situation also with the gas from Mozambique, which I won't go into right now, because I also would explore the possibility of getting more gas from Mozambique to build more refining capacity in South Africa, maybe perhaps around Limpopo and or Mpumalanga. Sasol is already in a relationship with Mozambique that goes back 20 to 30 years about getting gas from Mozambique, and it's also coming to South Africa via pipelines, because getting gas from one country to another, even if it goes at a distance of 3,000 kilometers, is cheaper than getting gas via shipments. So the scale of this project will probably be the most ambitious and most brazen and most audacious project that South Africa would have built. It would probably be bigger than all of the World Cup 2010 World Cup stadiums that were built, in terms of the scale and the cost combined. And it will be more than the cost of building the World Cups and building the How Train. That is how big this project would be. And I would say build a gas refinery in the northwest, there in the border, just off the border of Botswana, that produces something between 400,000 to 600,000 barrels per day. Let me repeat that. 400,000 to 600,000 barrels per day. This is not a project that can be run by the government on its own, but it's a project that I would expect that the government, probably via PetroSA, to go into a joint venture, probably with Sasol and Chevron, and maybe with Sasol and Engine, to share, to split the cost of this project and to actually co-own it and co-manage it. And that's actually also not unprecedented. I'm just gonna remind the viewer that right now Sasol is actually co-owning and co-managing a large processing facility, refining facility in Lake Charles, just up here in Louisiana. It's one of the largest Sasol complexes in the world. It's probably second in importance in the Sasol assets, behind only Secunda. It's large and it's co-owned and co-managed by it's an American chemicals company. I forgot the name now. Yeah, so this issue of co-running and co-managing and co-owning large refining assets is actually quite a common practice in the oil and gas space because of how large and expensive these projects can be. So then I would say that if you can split this project into three ways: of the government funding part of it, one third of it, and then Sasol maybe funding thirds of it, and Engine maybe funding thirds of it. And if those two are not interested, it won't be difficult to get either ExxonMobil, Shell, Total, or any of these other ones who don't necessarily have any refining footprint in South Africa, but they do have some refining footprint in the rest of Africa. You need to understand that when it comes to oil and gas companies, the number one, like the overwhelming share of their profits actually come from their refining, assets. So it is very important to understand that refining assets are more important than the downstream assets like gas stations or petrol stations, because that is where the value add happens and that's where most of the profits come from. So it would not be difficult to get any of these multinational oil and gas companies to invest in this project. Yeah, and so, but I'll still expect the South African government to have a substantial share in it, at least 20 to 30% of it to be owned by the government. And what is to expect from this project that has a 400,000 to 600,000 barrels per day processing capacity? It will employ employees to the tune of maybe 75,000 to 90,000 people. That is larger than most small towns in South Africa. And folks, the scale of this is actually mind blowing. But it is not unprecedented. It's been done several times in other markets. It has recently just been done in Nigeria. And if Nigeria can do it, I don't see why South Africa can't do it. Like China does things like this, like regularly. The US do things like this. And if South Africa has a future of actually being a very successful economy and successful market, you need bold action of this kind. And then I'm saying that, say 80,000 employees, and if you add that 80,000 employees to the 30,000 employees that will be created, jobs that will be created from the previous video that I made about 2 nuclear power stations, that would take it around 120,000 employees. And that would substantially take the South African economy that will add around, let's just say 1.5 to 2% of direct economic growth that just comes from these 3 projects. And this is before I talk about that. Then the government will have to ensure that the Durban refinery is reopened and that the Mossel Bay refinery is reopened. The Mossel Bay refinery, for instance, which processes natural gas, might have to be purposed to become an oil refinery. And that's not very difficult because oil refineries, if you know, and I mean, I suppose I understand that people who are watching these videos are not chemical engineers, so you don't really understand how these things work. So I get that, but oil refineries and gas refineries are basically the same thing. The only difference is that the oil refinery has an additional processing step. We can even just say 2 additional processing steps. On the feed side, and maybe two more additional processing steps on the tail side of in terms of, because the sulfur content is higher, so you need additional processing units to actually remove the sulfur, because the sulfur content in crude oil is higher than in natural gas, and also the CO2 content is also higher. So there's just a couple of units that you might have to add. There might be some materials, some sort of processing equipment that you might have to change the material, because the temperatures might not necessarily be the same in terms of the processing temperatures, but they are not that different. But in terms of the long term, if you don't change them, it will actually affect the life span of the plant. But in general, it won't cost you more than a couple of, say, a few hundred millions of dollars to just repurpose it. And then once you've done that, even in probably try to increase the capacity maybe by 10% or 20%, but it is very critical that you reopen the plant, you reopen the Durban plant, and assist industry in every way possible in terms of trying to get the oil to these plants, because they need to process the oil in Durban, and they need to process the oil if now the Mossel Bay refinery is now an oil refinery. That would be something that might end up adding another 20,000 jobs. So those are the bold actions that need to be taken. Yeah, those are the bold actions that need to be taken that would actually put South Africa in a direction that of growth that would ensure that we are actually really now growing and growing and growing and growing. And of course that's not enough, because we need to grow, maybe, because I'm saying if 1.5 to 2% growth, that's not even enough, because I would say that at a minimum you need around 4% growth. So you still need a lot more directed action, direct investment, direct intervention. And these actions are actually the actions that the government can do right now. Okay, I did say that with the nuclear power stations that those projects could take 5 years. This particular project, the scale of it, it's very unlikely to have this project being complete in 5 years, unless the installation of the pipeline and the construction of the refinery are happening at the same time, which won't be ideal. So I would say that a project like this might actually take 10 years. But if time is of the essence, we might have to say, okay, listen guys, let's get some Russians in here. Let's get some Russians. They have experience with this. They've done this before. Or let's get some Americans. They've done this over 3,500 kilometers of Canada to the US. Get these guys, get them to work night and day. Sometimes speed is the most important thing, because South Africa is so desperate. So it might be you get some Russian teams, you get some American teams, you even get some Chinese teams, and you are working night and day. And one thing also that I've failed to mention is that this pipeline will create jobs in Angola, it will create jobs in Botswana, it will create jobs in Namibia. So it is certainly a win-win situation. This is over above the fact that South Africa would be paying Angola for the gas that we are buying from them. But over and above that, it will create at least 1,000 direct jobs in Angola. Yeah, so this video is longer than most of my videos, but as you can see, that I wasn't just meandering and talking endlessly for no reason. Okay, just once you've watched it, tell me what you think. What are your thoughts? What I did not think about? What are the things that I have not considered? What are the things, do you like it? Do you don't like? But this is something that if I would actually do it. Some of the finer details might have to change. You might need more design engineers. You might have to get more foreign skilled people, engineers, especially design engineers from all over the place. Get design engineers from Russia, design engineers from Europe, design engineers from the US, and pay people more than market value salaries and just get this thing done. And it will actually, it will be, this is one thing that will actually work. Yeah, but just let me know in the comments section, what do you think about it? What are your thoughts? Which parts of it do you think need a bit adjusting? But it would require quite a bit of money. I'm estimating maybe double figure $billion, more than $10 billion. It would be quite a lot of money. And I'm not concerned about that, because it's worth it. It's worth it. It would be funded through debt and through private equity, through shares, through the private sector investing in it. There will be all kinds of funding vehicles that will be utilized but this will probably be the most audacious project that has ever been attempted in Africa since the pyramids, actually. And I think it's doable. Let me know what you think. Sure.